a novice developer offers a sly wink at Zelda II in episode 15 of Metroidvania Works.
And the cut above his right eye, now much more bloody, countered with a barrage of vicious body blows.
Although Zelda fans tend to look at the second entry in the franchise as the ugly duckling, the black sheep of the family, the fact of the matter is it had considerable impact back in the day. Tons of other developers scrambled to imitate its design, some more overtly than others. Weirdly, the first truly overt Zelda II knockoff concerned itself with one of the least compatible subjects you could possibly imagine: Sylvester Stallone's Rambo. A variety of publishers around the world rushed to snatch up the rights to produce games based on the 1985 hit film, including a little-known Japanese computer firm called Pack-In Video. Like a lot of companies who produced video games for the Japanese market in the mid-1980s, Pack-In Video appears to have emerged as an attempt by existing businesses to finagle some profits in the wake of the Famicom boom. According to Glitchwave, Pack-In Video launched way back in 1970 as a video distribution venture affiliated with TBS, JVC, and other electronics giants. That likely accounts for the company's earliest video game ventures, which included not only Rambo, but also Jim Henson's Labyrinth, Predator, Knight Rider, Space Camp, and Young Sherlock Holmes. Parlaying its video distribution deals into video game deals made for a fairly tidy transition, giving Pack-In's initial releases a level of mainstream visibility that many other would-be software giants lacked with their console conversions of third-string arcade games and esoteric personal computer creations. Of course, locking down the Rambo license isn't the same thing as just having a Rambo game worth playing. In fact, 1985's Rambo for the MSX computer was the company's first video game release, period, and they explored a few different takes on the subject before arriving at the NES game. The original Rambo played more or less like a clone of Capcom's Commando. No relation to Schwarzenegger's film. Well, no official relation anyway. This was followed by Super Rambo Special, a game that broke away from pure linear design and seemed almost like a clumsy first foray into the top-down military stealth adventure that Konami would properly invent a year later with Metal Gear. And if Metal Gear was simply The Legend of Zelda but with modern army action vibes, perhaps it seems only fitting that the company's next attempt at Rambo, which made its debut on Famicom in December 1987, would pursue the second Zelda's format. That's a bold plan for an untested developer, and in truth, it didn't work out quite as well as they probably would have liked. Yet you can't write off Rambo for NES and Famicom as a complete failure or true disaster, because it swings for the fences and almost manages to score. For starters, it directly adapts the film into video game form, playing out as an open-world, side-scrolling platform shooter driven by a linear plot. You genuinely did not see arcade-style action games propelled by a narrative in 1987. Even Zelda II and Castlevania II had stories that amounted to little more than color text. Those games had premises, but their in-game dialogue had almost nothing to do with the larger plot. Instead, NPCs simply served to lead you to the next activity for progression, telling you about other locations or dropping hints for finding new weapons, skills, and tools. Rambo, on the other hand, begins with protagonist John Rambo in a military camp and doesn't properly begin until he speaks to his commanding officers and accepts his mission to infiltrate the Vietnamese jungle in search of prisoners of war. You can wander freely through many spaces in the world straight away, but you can't actually accomplish things there until you complete story-related tasks. At a glance, Rambo's quest to rescue a lost child from a dark cave may not seem all that different from Link's quest to rescue a lost child from a dark cave in Zelda II. But look more closely at Rambo's game and you start to notice the presence of points of no return, pivotal events that change the nature of the adventure by bringing new enemies into the mix, or even letting you play as a different character. Story dictates Rambo's progress even more actively than plot events created in-game checkpoints in Phazanadu. The narrative here isn't content to simply exist as wallpaper in the background. Unbelievably enough, Pack-In Video impressively attempted to combine an interactive adaptation of the film's events with an open-world, exploratory action game. Most of the game takes place in the jungles of Vietnam, linking together jungles and swamps and villages and military encampments into a convoluted, continuous world. Rambo's map doesn't simply flow left or right with paths leading up and down to allow you to branch in different directions. It incorporates a third axis of travel despite its 2D nature. Rambo's left-to-right movement represents his east-west transversal through the jungle. But throughout the game, you'll spot small squares on the ground labeled N or S, that is, north or south. Stepping onto these tiles and pressing up allows Rambo to shift to another plane of the jungle. continuing his east-west exploration on a parallel track to the ground he covered before he ducked north or south. It's a fun idea, although it doesn't work quite as smoothly as you might prefer. Unlike the front and back maps in the Goonies 2, the connections between the different tracks of the jungle don't always line up consistently. This jungle wasn't designed as methodically as it should have been, and that sometimes makes for a deeply confusing environment. The convoluted layouts can be a real source of frustration because the game has so much going for it otherwise. The developers clearly put a lot of themselves into this oddball take on a popular foreign film. Where so many licensed games of this era play like nothing more than some generic work with a recognizable character image shoved onto the title screen, Rambo really feels like Pack-In Video's team wanted to create a game that legitimately engaged with the material. It's a Zelda II clone, sure, but it genuinely radiates Rambo-ness. Despite the technical limitations of this era of NES software, it stuffs a lot of variety into memory. Rambo travels through a wide range of environments, including cliffs and waterfalls, rivers, and even a Soviet base patrolled by some sort of futuristic mechanism. You travel by boat and helicopter, return to the jungle after your mission is scrubbed in defiance of the US government, and even play briefly as Rambo's guide and love interest, Ko. The developers threw in weird little jokes, too, seemingly for their own amusement, like the Russian soldier whose head balloons when you attack him. And all of this takes place in a huge, sprawling network of spaces and stages. On top of that, Rambo doesn't just contain the story of a console RPG, but the skill mechanics as well. As Rambo battles through the jungle, he gains experience points from fallen foes. As these accumulate, his durability and combat prowess increase. By default, Rambo battles with a trench knife, which offers decent power and terrible range. But as you defeat enemy creatures and soldiers alike, Rambo gathers expendable tools, ranging from exploding arrows to grenades to machine gun ammo. Between the open, interconnected world, the central narrative, and the role-playing mechanics, this genuinely feels like the closest thing the world had yet seen to what we would eventually think of as the platonic ideal of the Metroidvania. I mean, it's a mess, but it's a mess that flies pretty darn close to the sun. Also this episode, Culture Brain dares to ask what if Zelda II had played more like The Legend of Zelda? And so we have the Magic of Scheherazade, an action RPG in the most literal sense of the word. Like Pack-In Video, Culture Brain was fairly new to the whole console video game thing at the time that it made its first proper bid at this ambitious genre. Unlike Rambo though, the Magic of Scheherazade draws on the developer's previous work rather than simply grafting directly onto someone else's style. Which isn't to say it doesn't owe anything to anyone else, of course, but fundamentally the Magic of Scheherazade feels like the developer took one of its older games, namely Kung Fu Heroes, and reworked it to incorporate more role-playing elements. The bulk of your adventuring here takes place in a three-quarter perspective top-down world in which you can walk around freely, attack foes with weapons and magic, use tools, and even jump around. Structurally, these areas closely resemble the overworld of The Legend of Zelda, though the action has a brisker pace and more elaborate geography that puts one in mind of Zelda's companion title on Disk System, the samurai-themed Naozo no Murasame Jo. But the overall game flow owes far more to Dragon Quest than it does to Zelda, Murasame Jo, or Kung Fu Heroes. Anytime you enter a new region, your first order of business is to stop at a local town where you'll spend time gathering information, buying equipment and items, and training up new skills. Once you strike out into the world, your rollicking, action-packed journey takes you across fields and rivers, through deserts and up mountains, into dungeons and palaces. It also takes you across time, as each chapter involves zipping through the fourth dimension into other periods of history in pursuit of princesses, monsters, equipment, and, essentially, additional party members. Your humble protagonist doesn't have to go it alone here. Although only the main character appears during exploration and town sequences, the oddball companions he collects along the way play crucial roles in the adventure. They allow him to cast healing magic, reveal hidden items and entrances, and more. They play a crucial role during solar eclipses, and allow him to travel via flying carpet. They also fight alongside him during the bits drawn more directly from Dragon Quest, the turn-based battle sequences. Seemingly at random, though most frequently during eclipses and while exploring dungeons, the team will find itself whisked into turn-based combat against mobs of monsters, and you can assign a team to assist you in your fight against these creatures. I don't know that the Magic of Scheherazade entirely works. It draws together a lot of different influences and tries to do an unbelievable number of things all at once, and it can feel entirely overstuffed with ideas that don't gel together quite properly. There are special events and magic spells that only work during eclipses, You can change the hero's class between warrior, mage, and saint, a class that allows you to use special items. You team up with nearly a dozen different party members, most of whom have little function in combat and only hang around in the menu to perform a limited ability from time to time. You can swim, you can fly, you can go to school to learn specialized information, like how to arrange your party into specific battle formations that only work against specific sets of enemies. You travel through time. There's a casino, years before that would become a mainstay of Dragon Quest. There's a lot in here for an 8-bit game. Despite its haphazard design, it feels like Culture Brain was working a few years ahead of themselves with the Magic of Scheherazade. This 1987 release wouldn't really be equaled in terms of its design until the 16-bit era in games like Soul Blazer and Secret of Mana. And even then, those games dropped superfluous elements like the turn-based battles in favor of a more direct focus on direct action. It's hard to say if the Magic of Scheherazade was a particularly influential work, but it does at least seem noteworthy, if only for the way it allows you to see all the disparate elements of the action RPG genre on such clear display, a game that showcases how the Metroidvania sausage would someday be made. Next time on Metroidvania Works, that flying too close to the sun metaphor makes a lot more sense as we take a dip into Greek antiquity.